Hello, you're listening to 199th special episode of Web Standard Podcast. I'm your host Vadim Makeev from HTML Academy. Today I'm in Amsterdam with the special guest Andreas Bovens, product manager of the Gecko engine in Mozilla. Hello Andreas, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Andreas Bovens. We used to work together at Opera before.
Oh yeah?
I started in Opera when I was living in Japan back in 2007. I was working there in QA first, working on mobile phones, and then moved into dev relations as a web evangelist. And a little bit later, moved to Norway. I think this was around 2009 or something like that. Started managing and building out the developer relations team from Norway in Oslo.
Yeah, around 2007 or 6.
No, it was a bit later, 2009.
Later.
Yeah, 2009.
Mm-hmm. And that's was the year when I joined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A little bit later, you joined, I remember, and a couple of other people, Patrick Lauke,
Bruce Lawson, and many other people.
Mike Taylor, and so forth.
Yeah.
And so then we worked on developer relations, built out the team, focused a lot on site compatibility.
Yeah.
And a number of those people actually I work with now at Mozilla.
Uh-huh.
And then started getting into product management, I think around the time that Opera moved to Chromium, switched away from Presto, moved to Chromium. So this was around 2012, 2013. And then I did product management of extensions. And then sort of was part of this or managed this transition from Opera extensions format to Chromium extensions format.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of rebuilding the catalog and dealing with all the new APIs and so on. And then a little bit later, I switched to do, this was probably 2015 or so, took on product management of Opera for Android. And sort of that got me really interested in product management.
Oh, yeah.
I thought, I like developer relations too. It's good to go to developer conferences sometimes. But at the same time, I felt product management is sort of where my interest lies. And then in 2016, when I left Opera, I was looking around and then I joined Mozilla a little bit later, a couple months later, early 2017, as product manager for the Gecko engine.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what I've been doing since. So I've built out a team at Mozilla with, I think right now it's around 12 to 15 people working on various aspects of the Gecko engine. So we look at runtime, rendering. There's also a team focused on add-ons.
DevTools, I guess.
DevTools, yeah. And also somebody working on new form factors. So like things like VR and voice, kind of stuff. So yeah, so it's quite a bit of things that are going on, but it's quite interesting.
Yeah, we have a web developer and front-end developer focused podcast, but it's always good to have browser representative. And so we can discuss matters around it. So we're at Frontiers Conference, and you came here to attend ViewSource. What is ViewSource.conf?
ViewSource Conference is a conference organized by Mozilla. It tries to bring together people from the web, from different browsers, a number of different viewpoints.
I was thinking to attend it in previous years, but it was always in London.
Yeah, that's true. It was I think in Portland as well at some point, and then it moved to London. And now is the first time we're doing it in Amsterdam.
Much easier to attend for Russian community.
Yeah, that's true. I also liked the venue here. It was very beautiful, actually. So for me, it was the best view source thus far. So yeah. And it tries to bring together like people from the web development community, but also from the privacy community, browser developers, developer relations people, extension developers, perhaps. So it's quite a varied crowd.
All right. So you delivered a talk there, some sort of Mozilla roundup of what's going on in Mozilla.
I presented about some new things we're doing in Gecko and mobile. So that's what I talked about. And then my colleague Harold, he talked about what's new in DevTools. So we sort of did a bit of a combined talk, essentially.
So can you tell us a bit what's going on in Mozilla these days? Like a short summary of your talk.
Sure, I can do that. Well, the first thing I talked about was GeckoView. Let me talk a little bit about that. So we have Gecko at the heart of Firefox. It's the rendering underlying Firefox. The current Firefox for Android browser is built using Gecko directly, but it is very difficult to maintain because you actually need knowledge of the underlying engine in order to build menus and do things in the browser. So it was really, you had to have developers that had an intricate knowledge of, the internals of the engine essentially to do fairly simple stuff. And so we found that this was not a good way to sort of build up or continue building a mobile browser. We wanted to, do something else and sort of rethink a little bit the mobile browser, looking again at, okay, which kind of problem are we trying to solve and what kind of product do we want to build?
And separate engine from interface.
Yeah, exactly. And do a better job. So we decided, okay, let's take a step back. There was a project going on called GeckoView inside the company that some folks had been working on, which tried to separate the engine more from the UI, turned Gecko into a standalone library that you could use to build apps with, to build Android apps with. And so that standalone library is essentially GeckoView. You can see there's some similarities with WebView, right? The WebView API, GeckoView API, they're somewhat similar. They're not completely interchangeable. And what we're trying to do with GeckoView is also to make it more powerful than WebView. WebView supports a lot of things, but not all web standards are supported on WebView. For instance, there's certain functionality like manifest support or web push notifications that are not supported on WebView, and so we're trying to support those on GeckoView.
All right.
On top of that, Gecko also supports extensions on mobile. We're also working on that. It's not quite there yet, but GeckoView will also support mobile extension APIs and so forth and so forth. So it tries to be a rich API surface. You can think of GeckoView essentially as a component that you can build browsers with.
All right.
So WebView, you can perhaps hack it and build a browser with it, essentially, but it's a bit of it's not really intended to build browsers with.
Right.
It is more like a web engine component, essentially, that you can use to show some pages in your app, like the help pages or something like this, or you load some resources from the web. But to build a browser with it is a bit, it's not really a supported use case. With GeckoView, we really try to make it, the purpose is for you to build browsers with or apps, perhaps. Some people might use it.
Is it just for mobile or?
It's just for Android, actually.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And of course, we're trying to use it as much as possible for building our own new products. So things we've been building with it. It was already powering initially the progressive web app implementation and custom tabs implementation in Fennec. That's the current Firefox for Android. And then that was sort of the test case, like, does this work? Oh yeah, okay. And we refined to API. And then Focus is being powered by GeckoView as well. And then our new browser, internally it's called Phoenix, but this is the Firefox preview browser that it's publicly called. Eventually, this will become the new Firefox. So it's the new concept of browser, mobile browser that we launched. And then there's also another product called Firefox Reality, which is our VR browser, which is built for the HTC Vive and Oculus.
Is it Android powered?
It's also Android powered because these VR platforms are powered by Android.
All right. So that's why you need it. So not only for mobile phones, but also for
VR. And so it's a good test case because like that, we're sort of forcing ourselves to support multiple use cases. You can imagine that VR browsing is a little bit different from mobile phone browsing. You need to do different things. And so we're trying to support these different use cases. So it's good to sort of, make sure that the API is clean, understandable, and support different teams.
Okay, apart from GeckoView, where Gecko is used, there used to be even Thunderbird, a mail client back in early days. And these days it's browser only, or you have some other products?
I think it is mostly the browser these days. So the Firefox browsers, that is mostly where the Gecko engine is used. There is one other project that is sort of I think for Firefox used to have Firefox OS, which is currently discontinued.
Right.
And then but it has turned into KaiOS in India.
So KaiOS is misusing Gecko.
Is using Gecko under the hood, technically, yes. But it's something that is run separately from Mozilla, so we're not involved there.
Yeah.
And of course there's Thunderbird that is still around as a community project.
But it's
that is also still
not actively developed and maintained by Mozilla.
It's not, no, it is not. It's actively maintained, but it's not developed developed by Mozilla.
All right.
It's a community effort.
Oh, it's good
like
to know it still exists.
Yeah. And it's like the SeaMonkey browser project. It's not an effort that's done by Mozilla, but it's a community effort that's using Gecko. And so, I talked about GeckoView. I talked about Firefox Preview, our new mobile browser for Android. So we're focusing there a lot on kind of a privacy angle, giving the user strong privacy controls and shipping with enhanced tracking protection by default. So it's in the product and it's also on by default. In fact, it's turned on to strict mode. Mm-hmm. So this means that we block all kinds of trackers, and we block fingerprinters and also crypto miners, all by default.
All
and
right.
so we feel we can turn on the toggle for privacy a little bit more on mobile because we feel that it's, there's always a balance between site compatibility and privacy protection.
Yeah, of course.
And so we feel, okay, we can go more even in the direction of privacy protection for the user. Yeah, we're still evaluating, like, are their sites breaking or not? Thus far, we feel like it's in quite a good state.
So it's Firefox Preview, meaning that it's going to become Firefox.
It's going to become the new Firefox, yes, indeed. So you can find it already in the Google Play Store.
So basically, you're relaunching Firefox for Android.
Yes, that's right.
Based on GeckoView and new tracking protection and things like that.
Exactly. And so we're also working now on progressive web app support and on extension support. So that's coming.
How is Android? Is it friendly for other browsers to implement their PWA support, or it's not as good as for Chromium, for example? Because I can imagine they have a deeper integration.
Yeah. So what you see is that progressive web apps are definitely there in multiple browsers on Android.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of the web API, so-called web APK approach that Chromium is following, it's currently only available in Chromium because you need deeper integration with Google Play. The Samsung Internet has also implemented web APK support recently, but on their own phones. So that only works on their own phones.
Because they have access to their Android fork.
Exactly. So they have deeper access there, and that's how that's powered. We don't have that. So what we could do is we could generate our own APKs, but then we would have to ask the user, please allow, untrusted resources to be installed. So we don't want to do that. No. So what we do is we place a shortcut and then we do like the special treatment of the window.
Yeah, like classical web.
The classical
PWA.
PWAs, yes. It's funny to say that there's already a classical mode of PWAs.
Just a few years later.
Just a few years later, exactly. Yeah. But so that's what we're looking at. But we're looking there also at what kind of APIs can we support. For instance, something new that's landing is web share support.
Right.
There was support for the web share API. And we're looking what else is needed next. So there's one more thing that I talked about in my talk at ViewSource was WebRender. WebRender is a project that sort of is a rethinking of our rendering pipeline. It's based on some of the work that was done in Servo. Servo is an experimental engine built with Rust. Rust is a programming language invented by Mozilla. And so we use it for a lot of our new projects. And so Servo was is an experimental rendering engine. It's developed by our emerging technologies department. And what we've been doing is to sort of take parts of Servo and apply them or implement them on the Gecko side and bring them like that to Gecko.
Yeah, I believe last year was it last year when you replaced your CSS engine?
Yeah, so that is a Stylo. Yeah, I think it was perhaps 2 years ago.
Already.
In 2017, we replaced our CSS engine with Stylo.
And solved a lot of problems for web developers.
It became more, easier to manage.
So instead of fixing bug by one, you just replace the whole engine.
We replaced the whole engine, exactly. And so we felt that it's easier to develop on top of that base and it's faster to implement new features. So WebRender is similar. What we're doing there is normally, an engine goes through like different stages when putting stuff on the page. Like there's a parsing stage, styling and layout. And then a frame tree is built after those 3 steps. And then the last 2 steps are a painting and compositing step.
Yep.
But with WebRender, we still go through these parsing, styling and layout steps in the beginning. But then instead of a frame tree or a render tree, there is a display list is generated. Using that display list, so that's passed on to the new rendering pipeline, the new rendering engine, so to speak, and it's replaced instead of a painting and a compositing steps. So instead of 2 steps, it's only 1 rendering step. And the rendering step is handled by the GPU, graphics processing
Right.
unit. So it's faster, it's more efficient.
Even on mobile.
Even on mobile, yes.
Oh, that's cool.
Exactly, especially on mobile. And so it can do this at 60 frames per second.
Cool. So basically you optimize this classical pipeline.
Exactly. For something more modern. So sort of coming up to speed with modern hardware requirements.
All right.
And so that's what we've done. We've then started releasing it gradually to first desktops, Windows desktops with NVIDIA GPUs, then AMD.
So you heavily depend on proper GPU support.
Exactly. And thus far, we haven't had to blacklist any drivers yet,
Right.
so that's great.
That's good.
And so next up is Intel, and then we will start looking at laptops. Macs also needs to happen. But at the same time, we started a project to do this on Android as well. And so you can think of WebRender as fulfilling two things. Like it brings better performance to certain types of architectures.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that this is especially apparent on mobile, on Android. So that's exciting. But it's also sort of a more sane architecture to work with. So we found that it's easier to build new features on top of WebRender than it is with the old rendering pipeline. And so it's sort of a more sane architecture that's more logical. And things, for instance, like background filter.
Mm-hmm.
For those features,
yeah.
we found that it's better to do this on WebRender. There's new accessibility features that are related to color blindness, so color blindness simulation.
Yeah.
And also those, because they rely on filters that apply on the whole page, they were basically impossible to do with the old rendering pipeline, and in WebRender, they actually work.
I thought it was just a simple thing to do, but
No, so apparently not.
all right.
So we see already the first benefits. And so you will see us gate more features behind this, condition of WebRender support.
That's cool.
And so we expect to further roll this out in 2020 everywhere. And then hopefully we can retire the old rendering pipeline.
This year at Google I/O conference, I heard that the news, or maybe they announced it earlier, that there's going to be a special version of Puppeteer for Firefox. Is it somehow related to GeckoView, or those are two separate things?
Not really directly related, but we've been working with the Puppeteer project to bring Puppeteer support to Gecko. And so, of course, we also have remote debugging support in GeckoView, so it will work with with GeckoView and with Gecko, as far as I understand, at least.
Was it Google's intentions to bring
so
support?
Google has been working on this on Puppeteer support.
That's really good to see, like two competitors working together on something for developers.
Yeah. Exactly. So we've been working with them on that. As a matter of fact, I think some of the engineers, the Puppeteer engineers, are coming to the London office next week. So to work with our engineers there that work on Puppeteer support.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Collaboration. It's always good.
Yeah, that's good. It happens more often. Like it seems like, Chrome, WebKit, or Safari and Mozilla are all competing. And in some ways, of course, we are competing, but then in many other ways, we talk a lot and we work together on standards and on new things that make sense for developers.
There are many browsers that were built on top of Chromium, like Brave, Opera, Yandex Browser.
Yep.
Can you imagine some browser could be built on top of GeckoView someday?
Yeah, of course.
Apart from Firefox.
Yeah, of course. So that's why we built GeckoView, essentially, to sort of make something that's useful for other browser manufacturers, or perhaps, I think we also have a lot of these OEMs that build, Xiaomi or LG and so on. They all have their own browsers in their cell phone.
In case they want some white label.
Yeah, they want something else, or they say, okay, we want to use something that's different, or that has, for instance, extension support, or that ships with like different features, maybe stronger privacy features.
Yeah, that was my question. What would be the benefit for such company to use Gecko instead of Chromium?
Extension support comes to mind. There's also, for instance, containers support is also implemented. So you can implement containers, for instance, on top of GeckoView.
You mean multiple account support, or?
It functions as multiple accounts. So as you know, like when you have a browser, you can open a private tab, right?
Yeah.
And then this private tab has its own cookie jar and everything is separate from the main session. However, it also is forgotten. When you close a private tab, it's gone, right? And you have to start again from scratch. So with containers, you effectively can maintain the state.
Yeah, I use Firefox containers and Firefox Nightly on desktop. I'm not sure if it's available on mobile.
So it is not yet available as a feature
Yeah.
in the new Firefox preview.
Yeah.
But it's something that's available as an API on
Right.
GeckoView.
That's
One of
good
the
to
things
know.
we're looking at is, for instance, to do something with containers and progressive web apps. Like this has been
Right.
discussed. Like, does it make sense? Because if you have a progressive web app, imagine you want to install 2 progressive web apps with different
Yes.
sign-ins, right? So then these kind of use cases you could support. So we're looking at, okay, how can we best do this? It's a bit of the UX around that is challenging. And so, but we've been exploring some of these things.
Yeah, containers on desktop is a killer feature for me. I have like 4 or 5 Google accounts
Exactly.
for different organizations, and I just color code them and have separate tabs with different colors. So that's super cool.
So yeah, so these are some of the reasons why other developers might want to use GeckoView.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think the big part of your Gecko team or project you're managing is DevTools. The reason for developers these days to use DevTools in Firefox, when they're not debugging in Firefox, for example, those are mostly layout tools because they are superior to what Chrome has, like inspecting flexbox and grids. And you also mentioned this color blindness emulation support. What was the reason for Firefox to focus on these directions? Was it because there was a lack of good layout tools in Chromium, or it's your strategy?
We realized there was a bit of a gap there. And with new things coming out like CSS Grid, for instance, we realized, okay, this is much more powerful if you ship it with good tooling support. And so we shipped that, so that was well received. And then we looked at other areas where we could ship good tooling support. Like something else that came out of the user research we did was Flexbox debugging. So we implemented an improved Flexbox debugger. I think also font tooling was implemented, improved font tooling for variable fonts support. And then we continued sort of on that route. Like other things we shipped, for instance, was so we noticed people use CSS a lot, or like CSS debugging in DevTools, of course. And then we looked at how we can optimize their workflow, essentially. So we implemented features like export changes, so you can save your changes you've made, and you get an overview of like, okay, these are the different properties you've changed.
I know designers that actually go to interface and try to change interface instead of going to Photoshop or some Sketch applications, and they can send screenshots to developers or even source code. Look, I changed this thing. Could you please implement it?
Could you please implement it like that? Yeah. Exactly. So then they don't have to remember or like copy over the items that they've changed back to their text editor and so on. So that is one. Another one is inactive CSS, for instance, that was implemented recently. So we're really looking there at what are the gaps in
I like this inactive
tooling
thing because like if you're applying like float, for example, in Flexbox context, it doesn't make sense because floats are disabled in Flexbox. So things like that. So it will cross or gray out the property that doesn't make sense in this context.
Yeah, and it can be confusing sometimes because layout used to be, well, it was complex in its own way, but it was like there was not so much syntax mistakes you could make because, well, there was floats and then...
Yeah, there used to be some positioning and float. Positioning would cancel floating or change it a bit. Yeah.
So now, of course, the tooling you have at your disposal is much better, or like the features like grid, Flexbox, and so on. But myself as well, when I develop a layout, I have to go and look back at the syntax and say, wait, how did this work again? And what was the exact syntax? So it has definitely become more complex.
It's definitely a feature for new developers.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a good tool for learning.
And then there's also other things we're doing. Like, for instance, there's a Firefox Profiler, which is a web app that you can use to do performance analysis in Firefox and share profiles with other people. So you can say, okay, I run this profile, and you can share it then easily with others. they can look at it.
Never heard about it,
Yeah,
actually.
it's profiler.firefox.com.
So basically, you run profile in your local Firefox.
Exactly.
And then you can share results with the link.
Exactly. And you can say, hey, look at this, I did these and these optimizations. They can compare.
Some flame or waterfall graphs.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
And so that is something that, for instance, we've implemented as well. And then recently, also because of GeckoView, better remote debugging support. So it's not just a focus on layout tools. Like it's an important part, but we're also doing a lot of other things in other areas to kind of improve the rest of our JS and DOM debugging.
Going back to Firefox for mobile platforms, there are many Firefox browsers out there. There's a Firefox for iOS, there's Firefox for Android, and Firefox for some other platforms, I guess, still available. Or is it just iOS or Android only?
It's iOS and Android only, I think.
Okay, on iOS you have like couple, maybe 2 or 3 browsers.
Oh, you mean Focus?
Yeah, Focus.
Yes.
And Firefox as Firefox, like a good old one. And what browsers do you have on Android? This currently, like old Firefox. That's gonna be.
Yeah. So there is quite a lot right now. Yeah. Yes, there isn't the old Firefox, and then it has beta and nightly versions.
Remember searching for Opera in Google Play.
Yeah, there were many Opera versions. I remember that. So Firefox is in a similar boat. I think it also has to do a little bit, perhaps, with some limitations on the Google Play side, whereby it's easier to launch a beta in a separate channel than to sort of launch it in the same channel.
Because it's harder to beta test.
And it's easier to build an audience, essentially, if you have separate channels. At least that's what we've noticed. So you will find of course, the stable version and then the beta and nightly versions.
All right.
So that adds more Firefoxes to the Google Play Store. There's also there's Firefox Preview, as I said, which is the sort of the up and coming version. Eventually, I believe these will merge. How exactly that will happen, we're still deciding.
Nightly and Preview, those are 2 separate browsers at the moment.
Yeah. So there's a Firefox Preview, and then there's a Firefox Preview Nightly even.
Right.
So, and then there is also Firefox Focus. Firefox Focus is a privacy-focused browser, so it is very simple. It will it only has a private mode, and so every time you close it, it will forget everything you've done on it.
All right.
So this is something that...
Browser with short memory.
A browser with short memory, exactly.
You should have called it Dory. Remember this fish?
Yeah, it's true, actually. Firefox Dory. That would have been good. From Nemo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we've been working on bringing some of the features of Focus to Firefox Preview. And I can see that Firefox Preview, in a way, will replace both Firefox and Firefox Focus. So that's sort of the direction we're going in. One of the things, for instance, we did is in Firefox Preview, there is a setting to immediately open it in private mode. So you sort of...
So to start in
private mode directly. And so in a way, it sort of functions then almost like Firefox Focus.
All right. So you're going to have just a single browser.
We're going to, ideally, yes, we will move to a world with a single browser, maybe with a beta and a nightly version still, but yes.
Because I'm on the fence myself. I switched to Firefox on desktop this year, I believe in January or so, like the first thing on January 1st. Yes, I enjoy it. I use Firefox Nightly because icon is better. Sometimes I use Android, and I just wanted to switch to Firefox on Android as well because it's actually possible to do.
Yeah.
Because on iOS there's no way to select browser by default. So
yes, and plus on top of that, you have the engine, right? You cannot use the Gecko engine on iOS because there's only
the actual engine.
So you can only use the WebKit that's available on the system, and you cannot, So that's the problem on iOS.
But still, I guess you'll benefit from your bookmarks synced and
of course,
like that.
Of course, yeah. So you can use it, but it's a bit trickier to use, and you don't get the Gecko engine. I think Apple sort of pushes you always back in the direction of using Safari instead of using your own preferred browser, because you cannot really set it as default, right?
Well, I think they're going to stick to that, but we'll see. Speaking of Firefox for Android, is there extension support currently, or it's a preview thing?
So in the current version of Firefox for Android, like the classic version, there is extension support already.
How good it is compared to desktop? Is everything available, or most of the things?
I think most of the APIs are available, but you have, of course, some limitations because the form factor is smaller.
Yes.
Like you don't have page actions, for instance, or things that, typically depend on desktop UI. So you will find that some of the extensions work a bit differently from what you would expect. And so certainly in some cases, the experience is a little bit, broken because the developer only tested on desktop and didn't try it out on mobile.
Yeah, but I think the simple extensions like ad blockers, for example,
exactly,
that should
or
work.
a video downloader or those kind of things, they work. We're working on in Firefox Preview in the new Firefox to sort of make sure that this experience becomes better, both from the developer side and from the user side. So we're looking there, like, can we, how can we improve this essentially?
We used to work in Opera DevRel team for a while, and a lot of people moved from Opera to Mozilla after this big switch, and the whole story. I was thinking if you can compare Opera back in our time with current Mozilla, are there similarities? Does it feel the same or is it a bit different?
Yeah, it does feel the same in certain ways. Like I remember when I joined in 2007, when I joined Opera in 2007, that atmosphere you definitely have a little bit at Mozilla as well. It's different when you have your own rendering engine and a whole engineering staff to build this.
Yeah.
I think, of course, Mozilla is much larger. There's much more people working on the engine than there ever were at Opera.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought Opera's engine team was huge.
It was quite big, but I think
around 50 people working on desktop and other.
I think it was something like that. I don't know the exact number right now at Mozilla, but it's definitely a number of times larger than that. Also, a couple of other differences. Opera was, most people in Opera were in one place. Like there was an office, of course, also in Poland and in Sweden, but it was everybody was sitting together in one of these three locations. Whereas Mozilla, it's much more spread out all over the world. I think over 50% of people works from home or works remotely.
All right.
So you feel there is a difference there. And then perhaps another thing was that Mozilla is open source, whereas Opera was closed source. So for instance, in our bug tracker, there's a different vibe, I think, when you work in the open. Because you write things differently, or you sort of are, you have to consider that what you write is public.
But you're talking about Bugzilla.
Yeah, this is Bugzilla versus the bug tracker.
Oh yeah, but I guess you in Mozilla you also have some closed part of Bugzilla.
This is mostly for security bugs. Everything else is pretty much open. So if you work on new things as well, like it's in the open, so it kind of structures your thinking in a different way.
All right. But I guess you still have some secret launches and secret.
There are some projects, of course, that are not immediately public. But a lot of the work we do is...
So if you pay enough attention, you can figure out Mozilla's plans.
Exactly. This is definitely true. So we see that there's journalists in Bugzilla as well, and they try to find, you did this feature, so and so. And so we have to be... It's kind of interesting.
So it's like developers trying to disassemble iOS updates to figure out the next iPhone form factor.
Exactly, it's like that. Yes. So there are people lurking around and sort of trying to figure out, there's something new happening here. So
that's cool.
We have had times when we just do something very small and immediately there's an article on G-hacks or something like this about like a minor, a pref change, and then So.
Oh, that's cool. Also, involvement in standards development. I believe Mozilla is doing great there, just like Opera used to in our days. I'm not sure if Opera doing any standard work these days.
Yeah, I'm also not sure.
Yeah, but Mozilla is a big player in this field.
Yeah, that's true. We feel it's important to represent an alternative view for the web because there's big corporations behind both WebKit and Blink. Everybody comes with their own agenda, so to speak. And so it's important there, we feel, to have like also a voice, especially with Edge. Edge is moving to Chromium as well. So we're losing another engine, so to speak, Edge HTML.
But how do you feel about it?
Yeah. In a way, it is understandable what happened. I think they cited like the the problems with compatibility.
Just like Opera did.
Exactly, like Opera did, and Opera went away from Presto and moved to Blink.
Oh, yeah.
I see why this is happening. It's still unfortunate, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It would be better for diversity on the web to have another implementation, and to also have Microsoft's view. I'm pretty sure they will, of course, be collaborating on Blink and influence the web like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that voice is probably stronger if you have your own engine, because you can make radically different choices, and
Yeah, that's true.
It's of course always possible to build your own implementation on top. Like we see a little bit Brave doing that on top of Chromium, like they have like a different kind of approach. But still, if it goes deeper down to the core, it's, for instance, permissions management or those kind of things, then you already have to, it's easier to do these kind of things. And you can do them in better ways if you own the engine.
Oh, yeah. I like what you did opposing Google with Manifest version 3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So extensions model, it's not even a standard. It's a Google's thing.
Mm-hmm.
But since you inherited it or implemented in Firefox, you have your own implementation. So you're trying to make it work for you and for your users, not just following Google lead.
Exactly. So we see there that they're proposing a number of things as part of V3, Manifest V3, that will be better for users.
Mm-hmm.
Some of which we're already doing or we are investigating to do.
Yeah.
For instance, there will be limitations on loading external scripts. And so these are things we're already doing. This is also part of Manifest V3. So I think there we will align. There's other things where we find some of the new APIs, for instance, that were discussed or that people are concerned about because they will make it much harder to build ad blockers.
Yeah.
There, for instance...
That was the main problem.
Exactly. There we feel, okay, there is a little bit of, we're not quite aligned there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we feel that we will likely diverge there.
I believe you're going to implement the whole version, Manifest version 3, but then modify some.
Yeah, there will be parts. I think it will not be, it will be like a selective parts that make sense.
Compatible, but...
Well, perhaps not entirely compatible.
I mean, like, in certain parts.
In certain parts, it will be compatible, and in other parts, it will diverge. And then we're sort of investigating, does it make sense to go that direction or not? So.
Yeah, it's always good. It's always good to see that when big company with reputation opposing Google. It's not like Google is always evil.
No.
But sometimes there should be some big players trying to oppose it.
Yeah, it's just different approaches or different solutions for a problem they're seeing. It's not about evil or not.
Yeah,
being evil. It's more like, okay, they have a certain problem and they have a particular solution, and perhaps we see this a little bit differently because we don't, we have other concerns essentially.
Yep.
And we want to, I think for us it's important to focus on privacy and on user control. So you will see a lot of the changes we're making in Firefox have to do with this kind of making the user agent act on behalf of the user, right? You have to have the user's back. And so giving the user powerful tools to control their own experience. Part of that is ad blocking. Part of that will be, tracking protection and so on.
I always like this user agent name because it's someone acting
on behalf of the user.
Like advocate.
Exactly. It's like a user advocate, right? And so you will see a lot of that in our current sort of positioning or approach to our new products is very much around that.
It's similar to what Safari is doing these days. They're also focusing on privacy, and they're also you're trying to fit this niche in the market somewhere outside of Google's and Facebook and monopolies.
Yeah, I think users are becoming more and more aware of the impact, as they say, big tech has on their lives. And they start asking themselves questions like, is it okay that Facebook knows everything about me, or that Facebook tracks me online, even if I'm not on Facebook, and they make a profile of me? Similar things, can be said about a number of companies. And I think Mozilla tries to be a bit of an antidote, or like a medicine against those things. Like you can use it to prevent, tracking from happening, or like to block certain things. and it tries to be the alternative.
Yeah, I really like what Apple's doing in this field, but I think I trust Mozilla more because of its independence. Because you're not trying to sell me anything.
Yeah, exactly. It is more of an independent player there, and it's in that sense it's uniquely positioned.
Opera used to be an independent player for a while, and then for a long time, like for 20 years. But then, since it was a public company, there was a pressure to keep the product competitive, to keep it compatible. So that's why we both remember this day when they announced it to engineering and DevRel as well, that we're switching to Chromium. And that was a shock. It changed everything. But Opera as a company survived. There were a lot of layoffs and a lot of people suffered from this. I'm not even talking about users. But Opera survived for a while. But I don't think that was a Chromium switch that killed Opera.
Yeah, it just evolved in a perhaps different direction than we would have liked.
Yeah.
I think. And then, also different priorities, different kind of.
But can you imagine Mozilla switching to Chromium? It's not like I'm asking you to predict the future or trying to figure out your secret plans. But can you imagine this happening and Mozilla not dying like Opera did?
It would be. There's definitely no such secret plans. Just to be clear, it's hard to imagine. I think it would definitely be, devastating for a lot of people, both internally, but also the user base, of course. I don't think it would be good for the web ecosystem because then you would end up with only 2 engines, and who knows, what happens next, right? So I think it's important that there is multiple implementations of the web. And I think that realization is also strong inside of Mozilla. So I remember when Edge HTML, the announcement came, it was just at an all hands. So every 6 months, everybody in Mozilla gathers in one location to work together for a week. And we have a lot of meetings and a lot of sessions together, workshops and so on. And so...
similar to what we did in Opera DevRel team.
Yeah, but this is like with 1,000
bigger,
with 1,000 people. Yeah. And so... anyway, so we gather all together, and I remember this was a while ago, perhaps a year or so, when the news came out, and it was definitely a shock, but it also felt like, so the news that Edge was, switching to Chromium, but at the same time, it also made everybody feel, this means that the work we're doing is even more important because we are the only independent web engine that's out there. So I feel like it made us even more, resolved to sort of continue investing in it. And I think I would have a hard time imagine us switch to Chromium. It would definitely have a deep impact.
I can imagine the future where companies like Google, Apple, Mozilla, and others competing inside of Chromium as the main web engine. I think it's still possible. We're going to lose something going there.
Yeah.
But I can imagine this is happening at some point in the future, maybe in 10 years or so. And we're gonna have just a single engine on a platform, and we're gonna compete with features or maybe with different forks, but still compatible with each other. I don't know.
I also don't know which direction it will go. I would hope that it wouldn't go that way. But I think the challenge there is sort of, it's about these different interpretations of the web and how deep you want to, essentially, if you start implementing features that are very differentiated from each other, then there will always be pressure about, okay, do we upstream this work or not? Or do we maintain it ourselves? And then, what if they go in a different direction? What if they implement features that we don't like?
Just like with Safari and Chrome, like those are 2 different browsers.
Exactly. And so eventually I can imagine forks again will happen.
Like 6 years later, those are 2 different browsers.
Exactly. Those are 2 different engines, right? WebKit and Blink. And at the same time, we were thinking of like they're pretty much similar. And then when they split, they sort of went their own ways. And now this is very clear. So I can imagine, yes, perhaps, I would hope not, but imagine there is a place whereby suddenly that's Chromium or Blink is the only dominant engine. But then I think the players in that space will probably have disagreements, and then I can think of new forks emerging and things still going in very different directions.
Right.
So yeah, it's yeah, let's see. Let's hope there is a future for multiple web engines. And I would totally be happy if there was, some other players popping up, like new forks from Blink or from Gecko, who knows, that or WebKit that would emerge and sort of go in different directions.
That would be great. And the last question, what would be the reason for front-end developers to switch to Firefox as their daily browser or browser for development? Just a few reasons for our listeners.
I think you mentioned containers earlier. That's definitely a convenient feature as a developer.
Oh, yeah.
There's, of course, the dev tools, like the layout tools in particular, that will come handy, where we see people saying, okay, this is actually a better fit for my workflow. They would switch to Firefox for that. There's probably other reasons as well, like, with features like tracking protection implemented, for instance, what we're trying to do is also show in the console and in our dev tools why a particular resource is blocked. So if you want to debug those kind of like, I have a website with ads, but certain cookies are blocked, for instance, by default in the browser, like those kind of things. If you want to debug that and understand what's going on, then, Firefox DevTools will also be very useful. So yeah, and this is a feature that's coming to, it's coming to Edge as well. And Safari also has tracking protection or tracking prevention, whatever it's called. So you will see like being able to debug those kind of things is also important. So yeah, these are some reasons I think to switch.
I would add one more. If you want to support diverse web, if you want to support,
of course,
if you want to help with compatibility.
Exactly. Yeah, of course. And it's, using other engines than most of your users are using. It will be pretty clear if there is a bug in a Chromium-based browser, your users will tell you, like somebody will find, right? So it's good to say if you're a team of Chrome users and, why not you being the Firefox user or the Safari user for that matter, so that you have good coverage and that you try to experience your web service in as many browsers as possible. All right, so that's another good reason indeed to use Firefox.
You were listening to 199th special episode of Web Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Vadim Makeev. Thank you, Andreas, for joining us today.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening and see you next week. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.